All right, let's jump right into this explainer on Mary Shelley's absolute masterpiece, Frankenstein. Today, we're exploring a story that literally rewired the landscape of literature. It beautifully and terrifyingly blends the darkest corners of human nature with this incredibly reckless pursuit of knowledge. It's a tale all about ambition, crushing isolation, and, the totally disastrous consequences of trying to play God. Now, looking at this modern infobooks edition of the text, you can almost feel the sheer weight of its legacy. I mean, this was written back in the early 1800s, but it's still shaping our culture today. And honestly, the most mind-blowing part is that Mary Shelley was only 18 years old when she dreamed up this nightmare. 18! She came up with it during a rainy summer ghost story contest of all things. Yet somehow, she managed to capture these deep anxieties about scientific overreach that, let's be real, are probably more relevant to us right now than they were 2 centuries ago. You know, we usually lump this tale straight into the horror category. We picture the creepy castles, the lightning storms, the monsters, but actually, this book is widely cataloged as the very first true work of science fiction. Victor Frankenstein isn't some wizard waving a magic wand. He's a young guy with massive aspirations in the actual field of science. He's trying to give life to a dead body using real experiments in a lab. And that crucial pivot from the supernatural to the scientific, that is exactly what birthed an entirely new genre of storytelling. Okay, let's move into section 1, Walton's Arctic Frame. So our story actually kicks off miles away from any laboratory. We start out with an explorer named Robert Walton. His crazy ambitious voyage sets sail on December 11th, and he is just overflowing with these romantic visions of the North Pole, hoping to find a new passage or discover magnetic secrets. By March 28th, though, he's stuck in Archangel, and the isolation is really biting him. He's desperate for a friend to share his triumphs with. Fast forward to July 7th, and his ship is dodging these treacherous, floating sheets of ice. Then, things get really bad. On August 5th, they are completely trapped by thick fog and endless plains of ice. And it's right there, in that desperate moment, they spot a sled driven by this gigantic figure. Shortly after that, they end up rescuing a half-frozen, emaciated European man from the freezing waters. And that brings us to this incredibly intense quote. The freezing stranger, who, spoiler alert, we quickly find out is Victor Frankenstein, gives Walton a desperate warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition. See, when Victor hears that Walton is willing to sacrifice literally everything, his fortune, his life, all of it, for a scientific enterprise, Victor just bursts into tears. He looks at Walton and recognizes his own fatal, destructive flaw staring right back at him. So he decides to break his silence. He shares his harrowing story specifically to save Walton from walking down the exact same path. Which leads us to section 2, a tragic, idyllic childhood. So the stranger officially introduces himself as Victor Frankenstein. He was actually born into this wonderfully loving, privileged home. But right from the start, Victor was wired so differently from his adopted sister, Elizabeth. While Elizabeth would look out at the majestic Swiss Alps with this calm, poetic admiration, Victor wanted to dissect them. He literally writes that the world to him was a secret which I desired to divine. He didn't just want to appreciate nature, he was utterly obsessed with conquering its hidden laws. But right as Victor is gearing up to leave for university, his picture-perfect childhood is just totally shattered. Elizabeth catches scarlet fever. Victor's mother, who loves her too much to stay away, nurses Elizabeth back to health but tragically catches the fatal disease herself. On her deathbed, her final wish is for Victor and Elizabeth to marry. This right here is Victor's very first real, devastating encounter with the unstoppable force of death, what he calls the most irreparable evil. And you can argue this profoundly traumatic loss plants the subconscious seed for his entire future crusade against mortality. Moving on to section 3. The obsession with science. When Victor gets to the University of Ingolstadt, his childhood obsession with ancient alchemy slams headfirst into modern science. And you've got to look at the massive contrast between his two mentors here. Professor Krempe is super gruff and completely alienates Victor, telling him his past studies are basically sad trash. But then Victor sits in on a lecture by Professor Waldman. Waldman speaks about modern chemists with this almost poetic reverence, saying they penetrate into the recesses of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. Waldman's eloquent validation of the ancient alchemist's dreams, combined with the actual tangible power of modern science, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire. Victor resolves right then and there to pioneer a completely new path and crack the deepest mysteries of creation. And to achieve this impossible goal, Victor subjects himself to some genuinely horrific, isolating conditions. He figures, hey, to understand life, I first have to totally understand death and decay. So he locks himself away in the solitary top-floor cell. He spends day and night messing with the unhallowed damps of the grave, collecting bones from charnel houses and gathering materials from slaughterhouses. It's incredibly grim. He becomes so consumed that he completely cuts himself off from the changing seasons, ignores his friends, and stops reading his family's letters. His ambition literally swallows his natural affections whole. Okay, Section 4, Awakening the Monster. Finally, on a dreary night in November, the moment of truth arrives. Victor has sacrificed his health and his sanity for nearly 2 years just to infuse a spark of being into lifeless matter. But what actually happens when he pulls it off? For years, he had been hyping himself up, convinced that this new species would bless him as its brilliant creator, that this was going to be this beautiful, majestic achievement. But the harsh reality of stitching together slaughterhouse parts, it comes crashing down on him the exact second the creature twitches. Just listen to Shelley's masterful, chilling description here. The beauty of Victor's dream evaporates instantly into pure, breathless horror. He had genuinely tried to select beautiful features for his creation, but the result is absolutely grotesque. We're talking dull yellow skin that barely covers the moving muscles and arteries underneath, watery eyes set in these dun white sockets, and the contrast of those pearly white teeth and flowing black hair somehow just makes the creature look even more demonic. In the blink of an eye, Victor realizes his grand scientific triumph is actually an absolute abomination. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Fever and the Aftermath. Completely unable to handle the sight of his own creation, Victor just runs. He abandons the creature to the cold. Let's look at the frantic aftermath of that choice. First, he flees to his bedroom and suffers these horrible nightmares of Elizabeth turning into his mother's rotting corpse. He wakes up, sees the monster reaching out to him, and he bolts again, pacing the courtyard in the freezing rain all night. The next morning, by pure chance, he runs into his dear childhood friend Henry Clarvel, who just arrived in town. The overwhelming relief of seeing Henry colliding with the sheer terror of the night before is too much. When they get back to Victor's mysteriously empty apartment, Victor collapses into a severe nervous fever. He spends months hallucinating about a monster while Henry patiently nurses him back to health, keeping the whole illness a secret from Victor's family. Finally, spring arrives, and Victor recovers enough to read a much-needed letter from home. That letter from Elizabeth serves as this beautiful, grounding reminder of the world he left behind, a world completely separate from his toxic, isolated ambitions. She writes about their domestic peace, about his younger brother Ernest, and mentions that Justine Moritz, a really beloved servant and friend, has come back to live with them after her own family tragedies. It paints this idyllic picture of natural order, family loyalty, and calm. Basically, it's everything Victor had violently rejected when he locked himself away in his lab. But honestly, all of this leaves us with a terrifying, lingering question. Victor kind of just assumes that because his apartment is empty, the nightmare is magically over. But we know the truth, don't we? He has released an 8-foot-tall, incredibly strong, totally unguided, and profoundly abandoned being out into the world. So is that serene blue lake of Geneva actually safe from the unnatural horror Victor just birthed? It's a lot to think about. Thanks so much for joining me to unpack the brilliant, icy beginnings of Mary Shelley's masterpiece in today's Explainer.